It had started like any other Tuesday. Emma had an early appointment for her routine health checkup, something she rarely missed. She'd always been meticulous with her health, annual physicals, clean eating, a weekly yoga class. She believed that prevention was the best medicine. So when her doctor called her back into the office after a mammogram, she didn't think too much of it. Maybe they just needed a clearer image, she told herself. Maybe it was just protocol. But when she sat across from Dr. Chun, and he closed the file slowly before looking her in the eye, her stomach dropped. She knew something was wrong before a word was said. Emma, he began gently, we found a mass. It's small, but based on its characteristics and the biopsy, it's cancer. Early-stage breast cancer. Emma didn't cry. Not immediately. It was as if the air in the room had thickened, muffling everything around her. Dr. Chun kept speaking about treatment plans, the success rates, the need for immediate decisions, but it all blurred into a dull hum behind the pounding in her ears. She nodded numbly, gripping the arms of the chair, willing herself not to break down. She drove home slowly, the world outside her windshield moving like molasses. She didn't call anyone, not her sister, not her best friend, not even her husband, Mark. She figured she'd tell him when she got home. They would sit down, she'd explain everything, and together they'd work through it. After all, that's what marriage was supposed to be, facing the bad things together, not just the good. But when she opened the door to their spacious suburban house, something felt off. The silence was strange. Usually, Mark left the television on or had music playing while working on his laptop. But today, the air felt still and clinical. She walked into the kitchen and immediately noticed the envelope on the marble counter. Her name was written neatly in pen. No postage, no note, just a thick envelope lying there like a forgotten invitation. Curious, and still half days from the diagnosis, she opened it. The first page bore the header of a local law firm. It was a formal notice of divorce proceedings, filed by Mark Anderson, her husband. Her legs gave out beneath her, and she sank onto the floor, the papers tumbling from her hands. For a moment, she sat there in silence, staring blankly at the cabinets. Then it hit her all at once. The cancer, the divorce, the timing. It wasn't a coincidence. She scrambled to her feet and rushed to Mark's home office. He wasn't there. She checked the garage. His car was gone. It was as if he had timed it perfectly, knowing when she'd be at the clinic, knowing she'd return home alone. Emma stood in the middle of their bedroom, staring at the unmade bed. On the nightstand, there was a receipt for dinner from the night before. She hadn't been with him. He had said he was working late. She finally texted him, "You filed for divorce today?" The same day I got diagnosed with cancer? The reply came 5 minutes later. "Emma, I'm sorry, but we've both known this was coming for a long time. I can't keep pretending we're happy. It's better this way. We need to move forward separately. I'll come by this weekend to talk." She felt like she had been slapped. We've both known. She hadn't. Not really. Sure, they hadn't been the most affectionate couple in recent years, but that was life. People got older. The spark dimmed. But divorce? On the day of her diagnosis? The full reality hit her in waves over the next few hours. When she reread the divorce documents, she noticed something that made her stomach turn. Mark was asking for half of everything, including the house that had been left to her by her late mother, a home she had grown up in, a home that had been in her family for 3 generations. He had the nerve to claim that it was part of the marital estate. Emma remembered clearly that she had never added his name to the title, precisely because her mother had told her to keep it separate. She had thought it might be a bit old-fashioned, but now she was glad she had listened. That evening, Mark didn't return home. She didn't expect him to. Instead, she sat in the dark living room, staring at the empty hallway. The house felt too big, too quiet, too cruel. By midnight, Emma finally let the tears come. Not for the diagnosis, not for the treatments ahead, but for the betrayal. The man she had shared 13 years of her life with hadn't even waited a day. He hadn't even asked how she was. He had been planning this, probably for weeks. The worst part was the realization that he likely already had a lawyer, a plan, maybe even someone else. She sat up late into the night, not sleeping. Instead, she pulled out her laptop and began searching for divorce attorneys. If Mark thought she was going to be too weak to fight, too devastated to protect what was hers. He was about to be very, very wrong. By the time the sun rose, Emma wasn't just a cancer patient or a discarded wife. She was a woman preparing for war. The days that followed were a blur of medical appointments, lab tests, and sleepless nights. Emma found herself caught in a surreal loop. One moment sitting under harsh fluorescent lights at oncology consultations, listening to words like lumpectomy, chemotherapy, and radiation, and the next, alone at home reviewing legal documents while her husband remained conspicuously absent. The two traumas, her illness and her husband's abandonment, bled into one another until she couldn't tell which was more painful. Emma had always considered herself resilient. She'd survived her mother's long illness and death, built a solid career in nonprofit development, and balanced work with the domestic responsibilities Mark rarely touched. But this was something else. This was betrayal layered over fear. The man she thought would bring her water and rub her back after chemo instead wanted half her assets and her silence. On the third day after the diagnosis and the divorce papers, Emma forced herself to do something she hadn't done in years. She reached out to Lydia Spencer. Lydia had been her roommate in university, a brilliant law student who'd since become a respected family attorney with her own firm. They had grown apart over the years, different cities, different lives, but Emma remembered Lydia's tenacity and her instinct to protect. If there was anyone who could help her navigate this legal ambush, it was Lydia. Emma left a short voicemail. "Lydia, it's Emma Sullivan. Well, Emma Anderson now. I'm in a situation and I really need to talk. Please call me." The call back came the next morning. Lydia's voice was calm, but laced with concern. "I'm so sorry to hear what's happened to him. I can't believe he did that to you, especially now. Come in this afternoon. Bring everything." Emma gathered every financial document she could find. Tax returns, deeds, bank statements, insurance policies. She stuffed them into a tote bag and made her way to Lydia's office in a downtown building that looked far more modern than Emma had expected. The receptionist led her into Lydia's private conference room, where the two women hugged tightly. It wasn't the kind of polite, strained hug people give out of obligation. It was genuine. Emma hadn't realized how much she needed that until it happened. They sat, and Lydia reviewed the divorce petition silently for a long while. When she finally looked up, her expression was hard. "He timed this," Lydia said flatly. "Not just emotionally, but legally. Filing before you've even processed your diagnosis? That's calculated." Emma nodded, her voice low. "He wants half of everything, even the house my mother left me." Lydia shook her head. "He can ask. But that house, was it ever in his name? Joint mortgage? Any contribution from him on paper?" "No, I inherited it outright. It's only in my name. I paid for the renovations from my personal savings. Everything's in writing." "Good," Lydia said, "because inherited property, when kept separate, is usually not considered marital property. But we'll need documentation. All of it. Timeline, paper trail. And I'll have a forensic accountant look through his finances." Emma blinked. "A forensic accountant?" Lydia leaned forward. "Men like Mark don't just spring divorces like this out of nowhere. He's had a plan. If I had to guess, he's been moving money for a while. And if there's someone else in the picture, another woman, we'll find that too. It won't necessarily destroy his case. But in light of your diagnosis and the timing, it paints a very unflattering picture of his character." Emma exhaled. "He'll fight. He always does when money's involved." "Then we'll be ready," Lydia said calmly. "But you need to focus on your health. Let me do the fighting." It was the first time Emma had heard someone say she didn't have to do everything herself. She wasn't used to letting go of control, but in that moment, she felt something loosen in her chest. Relief, maybe even a shred of hope. By the end of that meeting, Lydia had assigned a paralegal to begin collecting evidence, requested copies of bank transfers, and suggested Emma document any communication from Mark, no matter how small. Forward every text, every email. No calls. If he calls, let go to voicemail. Emma returned home that day with a new kind of energy. She started compiling her own file. She went through drawers and folders with the precision of a detective, pulling old property assessments, bank statements, and even receipts from the time she had paid for a trip to Europe they were supposed to take together. One that Mark had later canceled, citing work stress. She found the credit card charges from luxury stores in neighborhoods she'd never shopped in, jewelry she never received, dinners for two she hadn't been present at. She felt sick. That night, Mark finally called. She stared at the screen, heart racing, before letting it go to voicemail. Later, she listened to the message. "Emma, I think we need to talk like adults. I'm sorry this timing isn't great, but dragging this out won't help either of us. I just want what's fair. We both deserve to move on." Fair? You wanted what was fair? The same man who left divorce papers on the counter the day she told him she had cancer. The same man who moved out without a word, who hadn't asked once about her condition or her prognosis. She didn't cry this time. Instead, she sat down and started writing a timeline. When they got married, when she inherited the house, when she noticed changes in his behavior, and all the strange transactions she could now see clearly. The dinners. The business trips that didn't match up. The unexplained withdrawals from their joint account. Lydia called the next afternoon. "You were right," she said. "He's been moving funds to a personal account for at least 8 months. And there's a condo in his name. Bought 3 months ago. We're still confirming the occupant, but I think you already know." Emma clenched her jaw. "Does this help us?" It does more than help. It changes the angle entirely. He's hiding marital assets. And the fact that he filed on the same day you receive a cancer diagnosis? It won't sit well in front of a judge. Emma exhaled slowly. She wasn't someone who enjoyed revenge or courtroom drama. But she wasn't going to roll over, either. Not for someone who walked away the moment she became inconvenient. That night, she began treatment. It was just the first consultation for chemo, but she took her notebook with her, full of timelines and legal notes. She knew her body would be weakened in the months ahead, but her mind was still sharp, and she needed to stay that way. In the waiting room, she looked around at the others, men and women of all ages, some laughing quietly, others lost in thought. They were fighters, not victims, and so was she. By the end of the week, Mark's attorney emailed Lydia requesting mediation. It was a sign that he knew Emma had come prepared, that she wasn't going to disappear quietly into treatment while he divvied up her life. Emma wasn't just surviving anymore. She was preparing to win. Emma woke up early on a rainy Monday morning, the first session of chemotherapy still weighing heavy on her body. The nausea had ebbed, replaced by a strange numbness in her fingers and a metallic taste that clung to everything. She sat up slowly, her joints aching as she glanced toward the bedside table. A small yellow notebook sat open beside her phone. Lydia's checklist of what to document, monitor, and prepare. The war wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. Though her body had taken a hit, her mind remained razor-sharp. She clung to it as though it was the last part of herself not stolen by either the cancer or Mark's betrayal. Her life had been sliced into before and after. Before the diagnosis, before the divorce. And now she lived entirely in the after, where every action had to be calculated, where emotion had to take a back seat to evidence. Emma's first strategic move had already been made long before she knew it would matter. When she placed the deed to her family home into a trust 6 years earlier, shortly after her mother's passing. Her mother had been old school, always wary of how men changed when money was involved. Emma had thought she was being overly cautious back then, but now, that decision felt like a gift from the grave. The trust documentation was solid. Lydia had reviewed it thoroughly and confirmed that the property couldn't be touched in the divorce settlement. Mark had no legal claim, even though he'd tried to include it in his initial filings. It was a bluff, one that didn't work. But Emma wasn't satisfied with just keeping her house. She wanted the full story. She wanted to know how long Mark had been planning this, how deep the betrayal ran. Lydia's forensic accountant, Paul Mendoza, had been quietly investigating behind the scenes, and within 2 weeks, his findings began to paint a damning picture. Mark had been shifting funds from their joint investment account into a business entity he had never mentioned, a shell LLC registered under the name of a childhood friend. The company had no website, no staff, and no product. It was nothing more than a bucket for siphoning money. According to Paul, more than $86,000 had been rerouted over the course of 10 months. The condo Mark had purchased, also in a friend's name, was located downtown, not far from a boutique interior design firm. Emma recognized the name immediately. Cassandra. Cassandra Owens had been Mark's colleague on a commercial renovation project 2 years ago. Emma remembered meeting her once at a company holiday party. Petite, polished, and charming in that brittle way that made Emma's instincts quietly recoil. Back then, she had brushed off the feeling. Now she saw it for what it was, intuition trying to warn her. Emma didn't confront Mark. Not yet. Lydia's advice had been clear. Let him show his hand. And he was about to. 2 weeks after the start of Emma's chemotherapy, she received an official offer for settlement through Mark's attorney. It was, in a word, insulting. He proposed a 50-50 split of all assets, including future appreciation of the family home, as well as half of Emma's retirement account. No mention of the shell company. No mention of the condo. No acknowledgement of her cancer diagnosis or medical costs. Emma didn't respond directly. She let Lydia do that. The next morning, Lydia fired back with a formal counterdemand. Full ownership of the home, 100% of her retirement account, and a detailed accounting of all concealed marital funds, including the LLC and the condo. The letter concluded with a veiled but unmistakable threat. If Mark didn't comply, the case would proceed to trial, where Emma's diagnosis, his concealment of assets, and his abandonment would be introduced before a judge. That same afternoon, Mark texted her, "Can we talk? I didn't want it to go this far. You're being unfair now." Emma stared at the message for a long time, her hand trembling slightly from the chemo. She wasn't sure if it was rage or exhaustion. Probably both. He had the gall to accuse her of being unfair after everything. She didn't reply. Instead, she gathered all the printed documents Lydia had mailed her, the shell company registration, the title record for the condo, the transfers, all compiled and tabbed. She took them to her therapist, who had offered to help Emma emotionally process the dual trauma of illness and abandonment. But Emma didn't need a venting session that day. She needed clarity. "I don't want to be angry forever," she told her therapist. "I just want to make sure I never get played like this again." The therapist nodded thoughtfully. "Then let your strategy be your peace. Justice doesn't have to be loud to be real." It stuck with her. Emma decided to make one final move, not for revenge, but for closure. She met with her financial advisor and changed the beneficiary on all her accounts. Where Mark's name had once been, she listed her goddaughter, Ava, her late best friend's daughter, whom she adored like her own. She also amended her healthcare proxy, designating Lydia as her emergency contact in the event of complications during treatment. Mark no longer had access, not to her body, not to her money, not to her life. Meanwhile, Lydia continued gathering witness statements and preparing for a possible trial. The more evidence they compiled, the weaker Mark's position became. Paul had uncovered an additional $15,000 in unauthorized travel expenses on their joint account. Lavish weekends and hotels Emma had never set foot in. Then, the breaking point came. Lydia received a message from Mark's attorney. His client was now requesting mediation to settle outside of court, citing emotional strain and unnecessary public exposure. Translation: he didn't want a judge to hear the truth. Emma agreed to mediation under one condition, that she wouldn't have to speak to Mark directly. During the first mediation session, which took place over video call, Emma watched silently as Mark tried to present himself as the reasonable one. His lawyer explained that the marriage had simply run its course, that emotions had clouded both parties, and that Mark deeply regretted the timing of the divorce filing. Emma said nothing. She didn't need to. Lydia did all the talking, her voice calm but sharp as a scalpel. "We are not here to relitigate the emotions of the marriage," Lydia said. "We are here to resolve the financial misconduct and ensure our client's rights are fully protected, especially in light of her ongoing cancer treatment and the intentional concealment of marital assets." By the end of the second session, Mark's side was visibly shaken. They had come into this expecting a fragile woman too sick to fight. Instead, they found a woman who had chosen her battleground with care and brought an army of facts. The revised settlement arrived 2 days later. Mark agreed to relinquish any claim to Emma's home, return $40,000 from a hidden account, pay 60% of her legal fees, and drop all claims to her retirement fund. The condo and shell company were left off the table entirely, though Emma knew the IRS might eventually take interest. She signed the agreement in silence. It wasn't about winning. It was about reclaiming her dignity brick by brick. Later that night, as the wind pushed against the windows of her house, the house her mother had passed down, now legally and unequivocally hers, Emma sat alone in the kitchen. Her hair had begun to thin, and her appetite was still inconsistent, but she felt something she hadn't in months. Control. She knew the hardest months were still ahead. The treatments, the side effects, the days when her body would betray her. But one betrayal had already been addressed, and for that, she was grateful. She had been dealt a brutal hand, but she played it with grace, strategy, and quiet strength. And now, the rest of her healing could begin. The final court papers were signed in mid-January, just as the first snow began to fall thick and wet across the city. Emma stood at the front window of her living room, watching the flakes gather quietly on the porch railing, the silence of winter mirroring the calm that had slowly settled into her body over the last few weeks. The documents, sealed in a manila envelope on her dining table, marked the legal end of a 13-year marriage and the beginning of a new, uncertain chapter of her life. She had expected relief, maybe even elation, when it was all over. But what she felt instead was something quieter, more sobering. There was no cinematic rush of victory, no sense of dramatic triumph. Just a long, slow exhale, as if her body had finally been given permission to stop bracing for impact. The court proceedings had never gone to trial. After 2 tense mediation sessions and a near miss where Mark had tried to back out of the agreement, the revised settlement Lydia had negotiated was finalized and legally binding. He relinquished any and all claims to her inherited home. He paid back a significant portion of the marital assets he had secretly moved and covered more than half of Emma's legal fees. He had wanted everything, but walked away with less than he would have received had he acted with any decency at all. In the end, Mark didn't even appear in person to finalize the divorce. His attorney handled everything via remote signing. Emma received no call, no text, no apology. And that, she realized, was a blessing. She didn't need closure from someone who had chosen convenience over compassion. The silence, in many ways, was the most honest thing he had ever given her. Her physical healing, however, had not been so simple. Chemotherapy had taken a toll on her energy and her body image. She had started losing her hair slowly in clumps around the second cycle, eventually deciding to shave what was left rather than wait for it to fall out piece by piece. It was a moment that left her sitting on the bathroom floor in tears, clippers in one hand, a towel clutched in the other. But she had done it on her own terms, just like everything else. By February, her immune system was shaky, but she was halfway through treatment and responding well. Her oncologist was cautiously optimistic. The early diagnosis had given her a fighting chance, and her consistent response to therapy was encouraging. Still, the days were unpredictable. Some mornings she could walk around the block, other mornings she barely made it out of bed. But she wasn't in this alone anymore. Not emotionally, not legally. Lydia remained a consistent presence, not just as her attorney, but as a friend who had re-entered Emma's life with a kind of fierce loyalty that felt like a lifeline. They met every other Sunday for tea and talked about everything but the divorce. Sometimes they laughed about college memories. Sometimes they sat in silence. That silence, Emma found, was the most healing of all because it didn't demand anything from her. Emma also found support in unexpected places. A local cancer support group welcomed her without question, and though she was reluctant at first, she soon found herself sharing pieces of her story, even her divorce, with strangers who knew what it meant to be gutted by life and still choose to get up again. There was no pity in that room, only mutual understanding and the quiet courage of survivors. One afternoon in March, Emma received an invitation in the mail. It was for the dedication ceremony of a new community garden at the nonprofit she had worked at for nearly a decade. Though she had taken a leave of absence, her colleagues hadn't forgotten her. A small plaque was to be placed on one of the benches, in honor of resilience and those who grow through what they go through. It wasn't about her specifically, but she felt the message in her bones. She attended the ceremony, wearing a soft blue headscarf and a coat she hadn't worn since before her diagnosis. It was a bright, cold day. As she stood among the early spring blossoms and watched children plant seeds in the soil, she realized something had shifted deep inside her. Not just an ending, but a redefinition. She was no longer a wife, no longer someone's plan B, no longer waiting for anyone to validate her worth. She was a woman who had been left on the hardest day of her life and still found a way to reclaim her future. That night, as she returned home to her quiet house, the same one her mother had left her, the same one Mark would never touch, she walked into the kitchen and poured herself a cup of herbal tea. The paperwork was tucked into a drawer. The legal battles were done. The cancer wasn't gone, not yet, but her soul felt lighter. Her boundaries were intact. Her future was hers again. She took a photo of herself in the mirror that evening. Bald, pale, eyes darker than she remembered, but with a look of something more powerful than beauty. She posted it privately to a small group with a caption, "Still here. Still fighting. Still me." The responses poured in. Friends from the past, women from her support group, even Lydia commented, "You look like someone who wins in the end." And Emma realized they were right. Not because she had taken revenge, not because she had won in court, but because she had chosen herself every step of the way. Spring came in slow waves. The garden at the nonprofit bloomed. Her eyebrows began to grow back. The side effects dulled. And one morning, without ceremony, Emma opened her laptop and began writing a journal entry that would become the start of a memoir. Not about cancer, not about the divorce, but about the unspoken strength it takes to build yourself back when everything safe has been ripped away. It didn't end with rage or regret. It ended with Emma walking through her garden barefoot one morning, breathing in air that felt new, standing under a sky that no longer belonged to the life she had lost, but to the life she had reclaimed. Quietly, fiercely, fully.